Greetings, your host for today on James Aparaku's platform. Tonight, we'll be discussing the African area, and we have a guest all the way from South Africa.
Sorry about that. Technology. Thank you so much for having me tonight, Grace. And thank you to our viewers watching from all over, I guess, the continent of Africa as well as the world. My full name is Asemahle Mihlali Makwedini. But I usually go by the name of Mihlali Makwedini. And I am a third-year student of law at the University of Fort Hare at the Nelson Mandela School of Law. Tonight, so we'll be discussing the Africa Free Trade, African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and yeah, that's what we'll be doing tonight, and thank you so much for having me.
It's good to have you on here.
I assume I may... thank you so much, and thanks to James as well for inviting me onto this platform.
Okay,
so I assume I may
we
continue.
can get right. We can
Yeah,
get
because
right
we're already
into
running
it
a bit.
now.
Okay, no problem.
Apologize for the delay. I apologize for the delay.
Definitely. So I'm sure by now we have all heard a lot about this African Free Trade Deal and the African Free Trade Agreement, and we probably don't know exactly what it encompasses or how it actually affects or will affect our lives going forth, and how it will affect our countries, our communities even. So trade is a very I'd say it's a very complex. I'm sorry about that. I'm sure you're hearing some of the noise in the background with these guys are watching soccer there. But trade is a very complex. It's a very complex topic. It's a very complex area of study or whatever. I don't want to call it area of study, but like it's a very complex field on its own, and especially this what we are going to be discussing, because there are arguments for it, there are arguments against it. For free trade, should we go free trade, should we not go free trade? And it's not only arguments really on the African continent, but it's actually arguments all around the world. So you've got governmental organizations, whether they be on an international level or on a continental level or regional level, and they're pushing for free trade. So it's not only really an African thing only or an African discussion, but it is a global discussion. And then, as you'll actually hear in my talk later on as I elaborate more, you'll find that, well, these governmental organizations are for it, but then the people on the ground are actually not for it. And they also have good reason as to why they're not for it, because it directly affects each and every single person that is on the ground, even you and I, who probably are not even in international trade or in the international trade of goods or anything like that. So before we actually start off, I will just start off in terms of definitions, key definitions I feel that we should actually all know before I actually then go deeper into and I contextualize exactly what it is we'll be speaking about today. And before I actually go on, I already introduced myself and I said that, well, I'm a law student, and but us law students, we're very curious about everything. We're not particularly one-sided or focused on one thing. So my particular interest is particularly tax law and international trade law, and so I'm in no way an economics expert. In fact, I'm not an economics major or anything like that. So but this is something that I'll be speaking about from what I know from my own research and what I've been able to observe over these last couple of few years. So let's just get off onto these definitions. So the key definitions that I'd like us to know before we go into this conversations is: number one, free trade. Number two is protectionism. Number three are tariffs. And those are the main definitions I'd like us to actually get into. And I'll just quickly explain to you what these definitions are. So what is free trade? So a free trade agreement is a pact between two or more nations to reduce barriers to imports and exports among them. Under a free trade policy, goods and services can be bought and sold across international borders with little or no government tariffs, quotas, subsidies, or prohibitions to inhibit their exchange. The concept of free trade is the opposite of trade protectionism or economic isolationism. So I hope you got that, Grace.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. And then protectionism. Protectionism refers to government policies that restrict international trade to help domestic industries or local industries. Protectionist policies are usually implemented with the goals to improve economic activity within a domestic or local economy, but can also be implemented for safety or quality concerns. Protectionism refers to government policies that restrict international trade to help domestic industries. Protectionist policies are usually implemented with the goal to improve economic activity within a domestic economy, but can also be implemented for safety or quality concerns. I actually said that twice. I'm so sorry. Um, and then we go to tariffs. and we go to tariffs. Um, so tariffs are usually associated with tax. So even in this context, they're associated with tax. A tariff is a tax imposed by a government on goods and services imported from other countries that serve to increase the price and make imports less desirable, or at least less competitive versus domestic goods and services. Tariffs are generally introduced as a means of restricting trade from particular countries or reducing the importation of specific types of goods and services. Now, an example of this maybe would be, let's say, the purchase of Italian leather bags. So you guys are in Ghana. Let's say the Ghanaian government could introduce a tariff of 50% that drives the purchase of these bags so high so that domestic or local alternatives are much more affordable to the Ghanaian consumer. So the government's hope in introducing tariffs is that the added cost will make imported goods much less desirable. So, like I said, now since we are discussing this African free trade, we need to then understand where it actually stems from, where the root of it or the preface of it all, where it all started from, because now we've been hearing a lot about it, especially these past couple of years, 2, 3 years or so. And on the news, it's being reported as, this is something that is so great. This is something that's so great. I don't know about you guys in Ghana, but in South Africa specifically, and as much as they touting or spewing how great it is, but no one is actually really explaining on the news what it actually involves, what is it all about.
Yes.
In all the news channels that we have, and all these news pundits and economic pundits that we have, no one is actually explaining clearly what is this exactly. So in order for us to understand what it is, we need to understand the history behind it. So it did not just bloom out of the blue. There's certainly intention behind it. It is a part of a bigger plan that was first formally proposed by the Organization of African Unity, which is known today as the African Union, and it was done so through the Lagos Plan of Action that was drafted in April 1980 to increase Africa's self-sufficiency, and later the Abuja Treaty. So the African Continental Free Trade, just to quickly summarize it, is a free trade area that was founded in 2018 with trade commencing as of the 1st of January 2021. So it was created by the African Continental Free Trade Agreement among 54 of the 55 African Union nations. The free trade area is the largest in the world in terms of the number of participating countries since the formation of the World Trade Organization. So it just tells you how big this is. So Accra, Ghana serves as the secretariat of this trade agreement. Now, the agreement initially requires members to remove tariffs from 90% of goods, allowing free access to commodities, goods, and services across the continent. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa estimates that the agreement will boost intra-African trade by 52% by the year 2022. So I'm just going to quickly go over the general objectives of the agreement, and
Okay.
amongst some of the listed objectives of the agreement is to create a single market, is to deepen the economic integration of the continent, It is to establish a liberalized market through multiple rounds of negotiations. It's to aid the movement of capital as well as people, supposedly facilitating investment. And it's the move towards basically the establishment of a future continental customs union. And there are many other things that are listed here. And it's basically, they say, to achieve sustainable and inclusive socioeconomic development, gender equality and structural transformations within member states, and to enhance the competitiveness of states within Africa and the global market. And it's to encourage industrial development, etc., etc., etc. There's a host of things that it purports to be its general objectives. Now, as I had mentioned before, this whole thing starts with the Lagos Plan of Action. So what was the Lagos Plan of Action? So the Lagos Plan of Action for the Economic Development of Africa was to be implemented over a 20-year period from the year 1980, when it was drafted, to the year 2000. So the plan basically blamed Africa's economic crisis on the structural adjustment programs of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, and the vulnerability of African economies to worldwide economic shocks, such as the 1973 oil crisis. So it has been characterized as the collective response of African states to the growing reliance of on the ideology of neoliberalism. The Lagos Plan of Action, much like the Abuja Treaty I will be touching on later, focused on the areas of food and agriculture, industry, natural resources, human resource development and utilization, science and technology, transport and communication, trade and finance, energy, and other areas. It is also worth noting that the Lagos Plan of Action is the first of its kind in the continent, whereas it concerns trade and finance, and it's the first to call for the creation of an African common market and the improvement of domestic trade at both national and regional levels throughout Africa. Intra-African trade expansion was encouraged through the means of reduction of trade barriers, mechanisms for the development of trade, and the establishment of African multinational production corporations and joint ventures. Internationally, the plan called for Africa's world industrial production to reach 2% by the year 2000. The plan also called for new financial policies at national level and regional levels to encourage trade and financial cooperation amongst member states. Now, the Lagos Plan aimed to fix many problems, and it faced an uphill battle of achieving its goals. So at the 11th meeting of the Conference of African Ministers of Trade in April 1991, about 11 years after the original paper was drafted, the Economic Commission for Africa, the Economic Commission for Africa gave the review of the impact of the Lagos Plan. So there was a review of, okay, so between 1980 and 1991, what has the progress been? And it was concluded in 1991 that there was a lack of an effective monitoring mechanism, and trade was impacted by natural disasters such as drought in 34 African countries in the 1980s, and in 1990, trade in Africa was behind most other regions. Trade barriers were also still found to exist between African states where they should not have, according to the Lagos Plan by 1990. An area of progress, however, was institution building despite the lack of funding. So then we move away from the Lagos Plan of Action and we go into the Abuja Treaty. So the Abuja Treaty happened 11 years after the Lagos Plan of Action. The Abuja Treaty was adopted on the 3rd of June 1991, and it entered into force on the 12th of May 1994. At the time it entered into force, the treaty had been signed by all member states of the Organization of African Unity, except Eritrea. Also, at the time it entered into force, the treaty still had to be ratified by states, including South Africa, and the last nation signed onto it on the 24th of January 2013, like nearly 2 decades later. So sorry. So James is quickly just sending me a text. Sorry about that. Okay, should be So, sorry about that. Yeah, so we're back on now. The treaty is so the treaty, the Abuja Treaty established the African Economic Community and laid the foundation for the eventual establishment of an African Common Market. And together with the OAU, the Organization of African Unity Charter, it regulated the work and aims of the OAU. The treaty provided for the creation of an African Economic Community through a gradual process of coordination, harmonization, and progressive integration of the activities of existing and future economic communities, which are known as RECs in Africa. The intention was that it would be done in six successive stages over a period of 34 years. So basically, some of these six successive stages, we've seen a culmination of them, as I'll explain to you just now. And some of them we are still yet to see their culmination, like them coming to fruition. So stage one, it was decided that we needed strengthening and creating regional economic communities, and we've already did that. I mean, we've got organizations such as SETBACK and COMESA, etc., and it gave them a timeline of 5 years to establish them from in the 90s. And then we've got stage two. Stage two was stabilization of other barriers to regional trade and the strengthening of industry and energy. It was supposed to happen over 8 years. A sectoral integration, particularly in the field of trade, agriculture, finance, transport, and communication. And stage three was the establishment of a free trade area, which was estimated to take them 10 years. So that's where we are actually at now, because we've actually recently established the free trade area. So stage four is a harmonization of tariff and non-tariff system. It's expected to take 2 years. So I'm guessing that's where now we are actually at or approaching, because as of the 1st of January, our free trade area as Africa has been in working or established or whatever. And then stage five is the establishment of a common market and the adoption of common policies, and that is expected to take 4 years. So I'm guessing we're also at that stage whereby now we are gradually establishing a common market and the adoption of common policies. And stage six, which is the last stage, was the integration of all sectors, the establishment of a central bank and a single African currency, setting up an African monetary union, creating and electing the first Pan-African parliament. It's also worth noting that, for instance, we already have now a Pan-African Parliament, and it's right here in South Africa, I think in Johannesburg. So we already have that. So there has definitely been progression in terms of that plan of the Abuja Treaty, and we are currently seeing that now playing out in the works. So going back now to this free trade. So like I've been saying, it's been touted as this positive thing that's meant to benefit everyone, and this is Africa's way of freeing itself. I mean, we all know by now, surely, the role that colonialism has played on the continent of Africa, and how even neoliberalism on its own has also been a major problem for the African continent. So resources going out of Africa and then coming back as finished products at a far higher price, and Africa basically depending and begging the global West for aid in return, whereas we've got all the wealth, we've got all the riches, and we are pretty much feeding the world. We are the mother of the world, basically, as the African continent. But there are concerns and there are arguments against free trade, and there are valid arguments and there are valid concerns, against free trade, because a lot of the times we live in a time whereby we're all very sensitive. Society has become sensitive to a lot of things, and we're living in a world whereby we all want to be politically correct. And I say this especially because before we go into these arguments and these concerns against free trade, it's very important to understand, because in as much as at heart you may be Pan-African, but that doesn't necessarily now mean that you have to be for free trade. you know what I'm saying, or this African continental free trade deal. So that's just something that I want us to keep in mind, because you can definitely be pro African and pan African, but you don't necessarily have to embrace this trade agreement, as you'll see why. I'll give you the reasons and the concerns and arguments against free trade. So free trade policies have not been as popular with the public, and I actually said that in the beginning when I started out. The key issues include competition from countries where they have lower labor costs. So it allows price cutting and a loss of good paying jobs to manufacturers abroad. Free trade tends to increase trade deficits in some nations to potentially disastrous levels. Free trade is so negative effects of free trade. Free trade is meant to eliminate barriers to global commerce and raise the economy in developed and developing nations alike. But free trade can and has produced many negative effects, which include but are not limited to deplorable working conditions, job losses, economic damage to some countries, and environmental damage globally. Yet the World Trade Organization continues to advocate for free and unfettered trade, much to the detriment of some national economies and millions of workers. And now they're doing so well, and now they're doing the same thing through the African Union with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So let's just quickly have a look at some of these adverse working conditions. So as underdeveloped countries attempt to cut costs to gain a price advantage, many workers in these countries face low pay, substandard working conditions, and even forced and abusive child labor. So these are actually human rights atrocities. And it also brings about job losses, like I said earlier on, and fears of job losses. Free trade on protests, for example, from the American public for decades due to feared job loss to foreign countries with cheaper labor. Yet proponents of free trade say new agreements improve the economy on all sides. But when you actually contextualize and you look closer and you zoom in, you actually see that there's no such thing. The World Trade Organization acknowledges that free trade does indeed lead to job losses. At the 2017 World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland, Roberto Azevedo, who was the World Trade Organization's former Director General, stated, and these are his own words, trade is responsible for 2 job losses out of 10. What happens is the other 8 are lost not because of trade, but they are lost because of new technologies, innovation, and higher productivity. Now, though Azevedo was arguing that other factors account for 80% of job losses globally, it's notable that the director of the world's greatest advocate was acknowledging that 20% of all job losses on the planet are caused by free trade. And there are other case studies that you can even look at, like, for example, the North American Free Trade Agreement. It's no longer in existence. It was actually replaced under the Donald Trump administration. But in the 90s, it was starting to culminate. So during the 1992 presidential election in America, there was a candidate running for the presidency. His name was Ross Perot, and he warned that the then now North American Free Trade Agreement, which is abbreviated as NAFTA, between the United States, Mexico, and Canada would create a great sucking sound, as millions of jobs were siphoned out of the US and into Mexico and Canada. And it looks like Perot was 100% correct. That's what the Business Insider actually said. That's what they noted. It looks like he was 100% correct. The Business Insider stated that the goods balance of trade for the US with Mexico has been negative and steadily growing over the years. In 2010, it amounted to 61.6 billion US dollars, which was 9.5% of the total goods trade deficit in 2009. And also, understandably, when you have job losses, I don't know about Ghana, but I know specifically here in South Africa, but the trade unions are usually against such. They're usually against job losses. They're usually against retrenchments and stuff like that. And this was the same outrage basically in America that happened in America with their unions, workers' unions, and who have strongly criticized the free trade agreement as the NAFTA free trade agreement as critically harmful to workers and the US economy. And they argued that NAFTA has harmed consumers and workers in all three countries, not just America, contributing to a loss of jobs and a drop of income while strengthening the clout of multinational corporations. And that is a huge claim because basically they're saying, in as much as this agreement has siphoned so many jobs out of the US and benefited these other countries, but even them are suffering in some sort of way. This NAFTA trade agreement hasn't been beneficial for any of these countries. Actually, if you then look at the bigger picture, at the wide scale of it all, and so they argue that it also harms consumers and workers in all three countries. It contributes to a loss of jobs and a drop in income while strengthening the clout of multinational corporations. So it's a case of the rich get richer, because we know that multinational corporations are already wealthy. And the unions contended that the increased capital mobility facilitated by free trade has hurt the environment as well and weakened government regulation. So we probably, some of us probably know, and some want to imagine, but I know that I don't want to imagine, but living in a country whereby there's less government regulation and big business can do whatever they want, because we know that big business or multinational corporations don't exactly have the best track record when it comes to human rights and actually having the interests of human beings. They don't, because that's not their main concern. That's not their main aim. That's not their main objective. Their main objective is always just chasing profit or maximizing profit, and that's all they care about. So there are many other case studies that illustrate the negatives of free trade. We could go on about that revolve around topics such as the negative effects on the environment. So anything from the negative effects on the environment to banana republics and even human trafficking. That's how bad it is. And then so sorry about that. These guys are making so much noise. Um,
Okay.
so then we can even take a closer look at home, basically. So on the African continent, we can even take a closer look. There's a case study in Cameroon, in the country of Cameroon, and whereby it concerns free trade. So Cameroonians rely heavily on
So
onions,
before we
and not
move on,
only okay.
sorry, sorry to interrupt. Before would okay, so would like to establish what exactly is the difference between the African Continental Free Trade Area and then African Free Trade Area Zone. What is the difference? Is there a difference? And then what is so special about the African Continental Free Trade Area? If you get what I mean, my question.
Okay, can you please repeat the question? I didn't
Okay.
quite hear you. You were breaking off
Oh,
there for a bit.
yeah. The question is, what exactly is different? What is the difference between the African Continental Free Trade Area and the African Free Trade Zone? Is there a difference, or is practically or basically the same thing? And if there is, what makes the African Continental Free Trade Area pretty, let's say, pretty special or unique? And then what is the probability of it actually being effective from what we
Okay.
previously had?
Um, to answer what is the difference between the zone and the area, if you were to ask me, I'd say I don't see any difference. But then
Okay.
maybe an economics major student might say, well, there's a difference and stuff like that. But I think it's pretty much the same thing. I might be wrong. I stand to be corrected. And then how is the African Free Trade agreement different? Is different from other free trade agreements? Is that what you're asking, or how is it unique?
Yeah. Yeah. And what is the what makes it so, I mean, different, basically different and likely to succeed? What's really unique? What
Oh
makes it,
man,
yeah,
that I don't know about the likely to succeed part, but what
yeah,
makes it unique, I guess, is because we've never had anything like it before in Africa. So
Okay.
its aim is to, or its objective is to boost intra-African trade, right?
Okay.
So if you are looking at if you're looking at where the current trade is in terms of intra-African trade and stuff like that, it's not huge, right? And it then also goes back to we're not doing it on a mass scale. Basically, that's what I mean. And then also it goes back to the Lagos Plan of Action, and then it also
Okay.
goes back to the Abuja. It also goes back to the Abuja Treaty as well, because the Lagos Plan of Action was the first to talk about this type of market that is basically going to be integrated for the purpose of African dependency, right? So that was the vision. African dependency. And that is what they are saying right now with this African Free Trade Agreement, that look, or area, is that it's going to bring about African dependency, so that Africa depends on Africa. Africa no longer depends on the West or on these superpowers. So basically, I guess that's what makes it different. But really, there's no difference, because it's exactly what the EU is doing,
Doing, yeah.
at least on paper, and it's exactly what the ASEAN, or Asian, what these Asian countries are doing with their trade agreement. It's basically pretty much just these countries that are in the same continent coming together, saying, okay, we're going to create one single market. We're going to create a central bank for our part of the world, and we're going to have the same currency. We're going to have a free flow of capital between our countries. We're going to have a free flow of people between our countries. And we can already see how the EU is set up, right? We can already see how ASEAN is set up. So it's pretty much the same thing, but it's just that we have never had that before as African countries.
Okay.
And yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
But whether it's going to be a success or not, now that is a whole different ball game. That's a whole different ball game.
Okay. We can go ahead.
Mm. Okay, that's great. So as I was saying, or basically also, Grace, just to add on to what you said, to what I just said, or what you just said, the best thing that we can do now. So we are in a period of speculating what this will mean for us, right? This African Free Trade Agreement and this African Free Trade area or zone is going to. We can only speculate what it will mean for us, because it's still
Yeah.
starting out. So we can, just like stock traders, because that's what stock traders do. They go on the market each and every single day, and they speculate on everything from commodities to shares to this to that, and this is how the market is going to move today, and that's how it's going to open at, that's how it's going to close at, and this is going to be the movement of forex for the day. That's all we can do, really. I guess we will start seeing the results thereof as time passes. I'm sure would have seen the results thereof within the next 2 years or so, especially in terms of jobs, and if it creates jobs or if people lose jobs. You know what I'm saying? So going back to this case study of Cameroon, um, so Cameroonians heavily rely on onions, right? They don't only
Okay.
rely on onions for cooking and food, but they also rely on onions for the creation or the making of sauces, and they even go as far as using onions as antiseptic treatment, or as remedies. But so Cameroonian female farmers have now been forced to plant cassava instead of onions, whereas before they were planting onions on a wide scale, and that's how they made money. That's how they fed their families. But now they've been forced to plant cassava instead of onions, not because they want to, but because onions that have been imported from the European destroyed the local onion market, and that is due to free trade and free trade agreements. So to protect farmers like these, what the Cameroonian government would need to then do is to raise import duties on onions, which are pretty much tariffs, and even more. But it can't do that because a new trade agreement with the EU called the EPA prohibits that. Onions are a staple in Cameroon. Cameroonians consume hundreds and thousands of tons of onions a year. And up until recently, they were grown domestically. And unfortunately, now they are not anymore. So it is getting harder and harder to find local onions, as most of these come from Holland now. They come so Dutch onions in Cameroon cost almost a third less than local variants or locally grown onions. So other agricultural products like garlic from China are also flooding the local Cameroonian market, and the European Union agricultural production is undercutting Africa's agricultural sector in Cameroon. So these are just some of the dangers that come with free trade. And I know that maybe for some, like I said before, it doesn't mean that I'm not pro-African or pan-African or anything like that, but because a lot of people are like, Black Power, Africa, move on, let's go, saying, well, we should support this, but then we can't support something that we don't have much information on. I suggest we educate ourselves, because it doesn't matter if it's free trade between the European Union or free trade amongst African countries, but free trade definitely has dangers that we must look at and we must try and understand. So, and also just looking then at trade in general, now global trade, not even looking at the African Free Trade Agreement, basically how these wealthy countries have been able to maintain the status quo in terms of trade is that they balance it out. So they balance it out with protectionism. And I defined what protectionism is at the beginning of when we started the conversation. So it's when it refers to government policies that restrict international trade to help domestic industries. They do this through a variety of means. They do this through tariffs, through quotas. So for instance, let me make an example. South Africa produces wine. So yeah, that's actually true. South Africa produces wine. And then let's say a country like France, who also produces wine, say, okay, fine, you know what? We will actually introduce quotas on South African wine because we want French people in France to consume more French wine than they do South African wine. So then they introduce quotas in terms of how much wine South Africa may then export over into France. And then not only quotas, they actually slap on major tariffs on it. Let's say they slap a 50% tariff on it. And so it will be more expensive to bring in South African wine than it is to just source locally wine in France. And then who suffers at the end of the day in terms of that? So the local French consumer will suffer, because that means that if a bottle of locally made wine was going for €5, that means that the South African variant of wine will be going for €10. Now, obviously, it is highly likely that the average Joe or the average man on the street will go for the cheaper option. So it makes more sense that they'd go for the €5 wine than they would do for the €10 wine. Just make an example of that. So that's how these developed economies, these affluent countries, they maintain the status quo of being these superpowers, is that in as much as they're saying that, look, free trade, free trade, free trade, but we must also understand that even from the perspective of the African Union, where do they get this pressure of free trade all of a sudden? They are also being pressured by the World Trade Organization. They are also being pressured by the United Nations to go this free trade route. And then another thing that I get concerned about when I think personally is that, look, majority of the African continent is not industrialized, right? In fact, not to be biased or anything like that, but I personally, and maybe it's just ignorance on my part, I don't know personally any other country besides South Africa, or that is as industrialized as South Africa on the African continent. I don't know any other country besides that has that capacity, that has the factories, and to take a raw material from raw material to final finished product, and to be able to put it out into market and to deliver it to the market. I don't know any other African country that can do that. I'm not saying that there aren't other African countries that can do that, but what that South Africa is the most. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, I was having a bit of a connection issue there. So what we see with free trade is that it's just another ploy from what I see. It's just another ploy from the global West to oppress African countries, to oppress African nations, because they only promote free trade when it benefits them. Otherwise, a lot of the time they implement protectionist policies. So now, in the African sense, with this African free trade agreement, if we go to it, really, what benefit will it actually have in terms of will we really grow? Will we have more jobs? Will we have more economic prosperity really? Should the goal not be for us to then make sure that our economies, that our countries are individually developed so that we are able then to come and have such an agreement when we have all established our markets, so that there is far less risk for our people, or and that we are more powerful to actually,
Yeah.
because the whole goal, we live in a globalized society. So now we're only limiting, the way I see it, we're only limiting ourselves to trade with each other, whereas we're not even industrialized. We don't even have that industrial capacity. It would make sense if we were to say, okay, Africa, trade with Africa, and we've got factories to actually build and make finished products, and then we trade them amongst each other, and then we make sure that we trade them at affordable prices amongst us. There's no tariffs due to free trade and all those things, and then we sell them at a more marked up price to the global West or these global African countries. It would make more sense, in my opinion. But is the timing right? Basically, that is what I'm questioning. Are we there yet? And I think not, because I think it would be best if we were to develop ourselves individually first and make sure that, okay, we are on the right track in terms of development. Like if Ghana could say, you know what, as Ghana, these are our goals. We want to get employment up. We want to get industrialization up. We want to make sure that literacy levels are up. This, that, so that we want to strive to become a first world nation first before we come to the table and say, okay, fine, let's gather around. Let's have this African Union that has this one single currency, this one central bank, and we with open borders and stuff like that. Because now, as is, there is already huge inequality amongst the African countries themselves. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
As is at the moment. So and there's not, and in my opinion, there's not much space for growth, for profit, because ultimately that's what it's also about. It's for growth. It's for sustainability. How then questions arise into sustainability of how then do we actually sustain ourselves by trading only with, like, how is African trade going to actually, then how is this going to work? Basically, that is the thing, because as is, with the way things are currently are, it would make much more sense for a country in Africa to go trade US, because the US dollar is far more than any other, exceeds any other currency in terms of value on the African continent, and that the US is a more established nation, um, and it's more developed. I'm just making an example out of that. And okay, sorry about that.
Okay. So would
Just
you
having.
say
Mhm.
would you say the main
Yes,
challenge
I'm listening
with
to this.
how can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So would you say the main challenge with the African continental free trade area is the fact that there's such a high level of disparity between the developmental levels in the African countries? So then I say the stronger countries, or let me say stronger in quotes, would continue to benefit, and the weaker countries will still continue to not really gain anything. So is that the main, would you say that's the main challenge with what we have, since the base we are doing
Yes, that is actually.
just this agreement? Yeah. Okay, you go.
Yes, that's pretty much my fear, and that's pretty much what I'm saying is that countries in Africa that are more powerful will become more powerful, and then the countries that are smaller, less developed, will then end up suffering more because yeah, they are more at risk. So then now the ball game changes in terms of is no longer the white man in Europe who's like abusing us now. Now it's Africans on Africans. You know, like in terms of yeah, in terms of and it, like we explained before, like it also comes with a okay. Am I back on? Actually, my internet cut
You
there for
are
a sec.
okay.
Okay,
You are now.
I don't know what's going on. Okay, I don't know what's going on. My Wi-Fi, it's a bit
Yep.
shaky. But like as we had said with NAFTA, the NAFTA agreement, for instance, what the worker unions were saying in that case study, for instance, that yes, the US has lost jobs to these countries like Mexico, etc., but even them have ended up suffering in other ways, right? So I think
Yeah.
if we progress with this and it actually gains much more momentum, and countries like South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, Ghana, the larger economies will be the last to go down. But what about the smaller, less developed countries? What about countries like Zimbabwe, who are currently who are already struggling as is? They'll be the first to go down if truly this African Free Trade Continental Agreement has negative connotations. And for me, it does have negative connotations because really we just slapped the word African in front of it. Otherwise, free trade is free trade. There is no there there is a time, basically. If you look at the strategies of these existing superpowers, there is a time whereby you then go the free trade route, right? And there is a time when you go the protectionist route. So, in as much as one can say, look, the European Union is made or was created through a free trade agreement, but the European Union exercises protectionist policies to outsiders. Like for instance, in Germany, Germany is the best economy in the EU right now. So Germany, amongst other things, is well known, right, for producing cars, but it's also known for producing bicycles. A lot of bicycle parts that come in through the European Union come in through Germany and Hamburg. And because China has gained so much in terms of trade, a lot of the parts are made in China. So now what Germany does is that anything made in Germany that says made in Germany, people take that it's high quality. It's a VW, it's a Mercedes Benz, it's a BMW. It's made in Germany. It must be quality because everywhere you go around the world, everyone speaks of German efficiency and German this, German. Germany is basically known for strong, solid, quality products. So Germany also manufactures bicycles. But here's the thing, a lot of the parts of those bicycles are made in China. So Germany, in order to curb that, in order to protect their sector, to protect their jobs for their people, to protect that industry, what they do is that they slap protectionist policies on parts, bicycle parts that come from China. So as a result, China, because they pay a lot of money to actually get their bicycle parts from China, Germany. What China does is that they were very smart. They actually avoided doing that and they actually send their parts first to Taiwan. So they manufacture them in China and then they send them to Taiwan and they come by way to Germany from Taiwan. They come by way of Taiwan into Germany and that's where they actually enter into Hamburg because they don't suffer any tariffs. And then the body of the bicycle, which is the metallic part or whatever you want to call it, is made in Germany and then the parts are slapped on and then you put a stick on it and you say made in Germany, but in all honesty, not 100% of that bicycle was made in Germany. So these countries, they protect, in order for them to protect their that's what they do. So it's still, I don't see how this African Free Trade Agreement is actually, our goal should not be to play on a local level. I believe only setting ourselves up for failure. Yes, if we had,
I think we're having a technical issue over there. So we'll just hang on a bit.
okay, Emma, who cut actually? Was it you or was it me?
You went off.
I'm so sorry about that. So where was I? I don't know where I cut off.
You were saying that it was basically about the states actually exercising their protectionist. Germany exercise
Mm-hmm.
like their local industries. So basically,
Yes, and jobs and so forth.
yes.
Yeah. So that's why for me this African Free Trade Deal doesn't make much sense, because we have first develop our economies. That's my thing. I'm not entirely against it, but I'm judging the timing of it, because the big money, the prosperity is not necessarily going to come from us playing it little. Success is going to come with us playing it big, taking huge risks, and actually exercising dominance in the whole entire globe, exercising a level of hegemony. We're not going to win playing in our own little corner as African countries and say, okay, we're not ready yet. We need to solve the dynamics in our countries first before we are able to then do that. Like, so for instance, it doesn't, I don't know like what example I could use, but like, if we don't have the capacity to we don't have the industrial capacity to build, to take the product from resource, to take the resource from it being a resource to it being a finished product and then supplying market, then what are we doing basically is what I'm saying. And I see a comment there by James. It says, is it that we Africans don't even trust in our own products? I don't think it's a case of not trusting in our own products. I don't think so at all. It's not a case of not trusting in our own products. I mean, we can set standards and have things like quality assurance in terms of our own products and stuff like that. But do we have the capacity to even create the products in the first place? That's what I'm saying. Otherwise, if we had the capacity to
Yeah.
create the products, we wouldn't be where we are as a continent.
So
We wouldn't
how
be where
do
we
we
are as a continent. That's the thing.
that would be the next question. How do we then build our capacity to build up our economics internally before we think of trading as Africa's one open market?
Yes. Now that one, I think it's a multifaceted question, but basically what I would say is most of us now in African in live. Okay, I'm back on. I'm so sorry about that. My Wi-Fi keeps on cutting in and out.
That's okay.
Um, so as I was saying, is that most in Africa we live in democracies. So I always look in terms of the South African context, I always see that people don't participate in democracy. Like we are way too comfortable in terms of we just trust everything our parliamentarians say. And even when we do challenge parliamentarians or politicians, we don't challenge them where it actually matters. We don't litigate and go to court and go to constitutional court. I'm not saying we don't do that at all, but like we don't participate. It's so active. Like, you must understand that if you live in a democracy, you must be an active citizen. It's so, you as a citizen as well have got a duty and a responsibility, and it can only be us who then push for our countries to actually to be economically successful, to understand exactly the dynamics. Like, I can guarantee you that in my country, people my age, there are not many of them having this conversation. And sometimes not even about my age, I can guarantee you that people in general are not having this conversation of free trade. But whereas you go to a more developed nation like Germany, or if you go to America, it's an everyday conversation that they're having at the dinner table with friends over the weekends, over barbecues or whatever. And they are having these conversations like, look, this is negatively affecting us. Hence, you've got so many protests on in that side of the world. Ordinary people protesting free trade each and every single day, protesting free trade agreements. And we don't have much of that here. Here, if you're lucky enough to find it here in my country, you'll probably find it in the academic environment, and there's a seminar somewhere, or it's written somewhere in a book, but people are not. We need to be, we need to want to know, we need to have like knowledge, you know. Like the scripture in the Bible that says, my people perish because of a lack of knowledge. So we need
Yes.
to know, because like, yeah. So because I'd said even earlier on to you, Grace, I'd said that uh, uh, um I can't believe I forgot what I was gonna say. But we need to have knowledge. We need to educate ourselves. Like, oh yes, I remember now. I'd said to you that it's been on our television screens now for quite a while, this African free trade, and no one is absolutely interested. Like, I know that here in South Africa, when the African Union meets and they have discussions around the African free trade area and all those things like that. It's somewhere in the business news that no one really pays attention to. They'll first start with the local business news, and then maybe they'll start with something that happened on Wall Street, and then only at the end, for about 30 seconds, 60 seconds, they've got a short profile, and then they profile it, oh, the African free trade area and this, that, and then done. They don't even go into detail as what's going on. So hence, when I did my research from a local perspective, I was like, this is all very generic. Nothing is actually explaining to me in detail. And then we too, as people, we don't actually question and want to understand what this thing is and
Yes.
what it, yeah, and what it actually means. And then I've got friends all over the continent. And last year we were having a similar thing. It was an online webinar, and so many students from across the African continent, they were like, yes, finally Africa for Africans and African prosperity and all those things. And African Pan-African ideals, like, uh,
Yeah.
but really it's they only slapped the word African in front of it, in my opinion. A free trade agreement is a free trade agreement, no matter where you are in the world, and it will have more or less the same consequences. So if they've got a free trade agreement in the Americas, in North or South America, in Europe, in Asia, and they've got job losses, rest assured those job losses are also going to be happening in Africa as well. So just because it's got the word African in front of it doesn't necessarily mean that we are immune from that also happening on us, happening
Okay.
to us. Because even when you look further and you look at ASEAN, I don't know how to pronounce it, I don't know if it's Asian or ASEAN, but the free trade, that the free trade bloc in Asia, the ASEAN, even if you look there,
Okay.
those countries are actually, they're complaining because they're saying, look, China's a beast. We're losing all our jobs to China. We're getting scraps. Only China is getting bigger and bigger, and we are getting scraps. So that they're complaining, and that was the same
Yeah.
reason. Part of the reasons for things like Brexit in the European Union, and Britain was like, you know what, this is no longer working for us. We can't be in the same a free trade area as countries like Greece, who are barely struggling to go by, and they're having marketers and this. and people are going to banks and the ATMs and there's no money, and they were just like, you know what, juices, this is not working for us. So basically that's also what I'm trying to say, that in the African context, like there's so much inequality, individual African countries, right? Like for
Yeah.
instance, there's so much inequality right here in South Africa, on its own, and then
Mhm.
how much more
Uh,
compounded is the inequality then when it comes to the countries? You know what I'm saying?
yes.
And we were actually in Rwanda together, right, Grace?
Yes, we were.
When we were in Rwanda together, exactly. We were in Rwanda together in 2019,
Yes,
and Rwanda is a beautiful country. It's a very beautiful country. It's very clean. You can attest to that. You've seen it,
it
and
is. Yes.
um, they've really picked themselves up
From
from the
yeah.
back from the genocide. Yeah, from back from the days of the 94 genocide. They've really done well for themselves.
Yes.
But you know, having come from the most industrialized country in Africa, there were already things that I could already tell, like major differences. Because for
Okay.
instance, when I got there, when I got there, for instance, so I'm just trying to highlight the inequality, the differences. So when I got there, for instance, in Rwanda, the first thing
Okay.
I pretty much noticed was the first thing I noticed was the system of negotiation. There are no set prices for products, goods, or services. I don't know if you
Okay.
remember that. Yeah, so like you usually go to a shop and then you um here's a pack of, let's say, chips or biscuits, and then you go to the teller and you're like, okay, how much can I get for this? This is how much I'm willing to pay for it. You know, there's so many francs and X amount of francs I'm willing to pay for it. And even when you want to get a
Yeah.
cab, a taxi, you negotiate for it. Like for
Yes.
instance, in South Africa, that wouldn't happen, because South Africa has got quite a well established marketplace. And I know that the finance of the banking system here is so good that it's usually number two or number one in the world in terms of banking each and every single year, or somewhere in the top three. Like it's so established. Like, you know, if I leave here right now and I go to the store, go to the supermarket, I go to Woolworths, or I go to Checkers or Spar or ShopRite or whatever, and I go to the supermarket, I know that this is a set amount I'm going to pay for this good. This is a set amount I'm going to pay for this service. And you even get told this is how much VAT the government is making for it. You know that, okay, fine. If today I am buying a loaf of bread for 15 Rand, the government is going to get 15% VAT. Like it's set, it doesn't change. You don't wake up today and say, okay, the taxi price is today 30 Rand, the taxi price tomorrow is 25 Rand. It's set, it doesn't move, it doesn't change, unless there's a 1 in a billion or whatever trillion chance that the economy just does something absolutely weird in a space of a day or something. So like
Yeah.
there were differences like that. And then, but that was the first thing that struck me. And I don't know, I can't remember other stuff, but like it's things like that. So now you can't group a country like South Africa, which has got a high
Yeah.
development index, which has got a high GDP. I mean, the average person here is earning is a GDP of upwards $7,000 a year, and compared to a country like Rwanda, which just recently is starting to boom, or another country maybe
Yeah.
like Mauritius, whereby the average GDP there I think is like 9,000 US dollars per person that they have on average a year. So you can't have situations like that, man. And then I know, even for instance, in Zim, my friends in Zimbabwe were telling me that, listen, we can go without power here for between 18 to 24 hours a day. And then you come to a country such as South Africa, whereby you don't have power outages, or even when you do have power outages, which you call load shedding, it lasts a maximum of 2 hours a day, and it happens for specific reasons. Like, okay, fine, there was so much rain that it wet the coals at the power station, the power plant, or a whatever they call a transformer. There was a transformer blast or whatever, or something like. So you cannot compare you can't group these countries all into one. It's what we always say, especially in an international setting, to people, and we meet, maybe we interact with Americans, and an American comes up to you, is like, oh, hi, you're from Africa? And you're like, yeah, I'm from Africa. And they're like, oh, wow, it's such a beautiful country. And you're like, no, it's not a country. I actually come from Ghana, which is part of the
Yeah.
African continent.
Yeah.
So like we are vastly different cultures. We are at different stages of our economies, of our countries, and things like that. So I just think that the timing, if we were to actually progress this now, of which we are actually progressing this African Free Trade Agreement now, this area, it's going to prove disastrous. It's going to prove disastrous because the bigger fish in Africa are going to swallow up the smaller fish. Yes, the bigger
Okay.
fish will also get hurt in the process, but then it's a case of who's going to die first, and the bigger fish are going to die, and the bigger fish are actually going to die last. That's what
Okay.
I'm saying, pretty much.
Okay.
So it
Okay.
poses a danger. Yeah, it poses a threat.
Okay. I think that is well
Mhm.
understood. Just okay. So basically, forward
Mhm.
right now to in order to show the efficacy of the what would be the most practicable plan to go ahead with? We actually strengthen ourselves to make sure that this continental free trade area agreement succeeds.
How do we make sure that it succeeds and it works in our favor?
Yeah.
Like I said before, it's all about us, right? Wherever you are, whichever country you're in, it's all about making sure that our countries are actually developing in the right way, in a positive way. So it's about creating social change within your own country, your own backyard, and holding politicians account, and having some sort of system in place, or metric in place, or monitoring and evaluation system in place, whereby you actually tell the policies that your government rolls out and stuff like that. Because like as I've been saying, I don't think that the African free trade areas are going to be a success if we are not playing our part in terms of developing ourselves individually.
Yeah.
So it's all about active.
Okay.
So yeah, it's all about active citizenship, citizen participation, and making sure that we are holding our governments to account, and we're actually making sure that they are working within our interests. Because it's in our interest to have developed, successful countries
Okay.
and developing countries. Mm.
Okay. So I think we can just wrap up now. But before I think okay, so before we go off, we can highlight, let's just focus on, let's say, two benefits that we can explain in order to motivate ourselves and Africans all over the world and Africans to in order to be able to
Mhm.
grasp and get an understanding of why this would really be a great thing if we work at it. But then, I mean, if we don't, we're going to have direct consequences. But then, if we actually do work at it, it would be beneficial for all of us. So we can read about two benefits before we go off in order to inspire other Africans out there, African countries, to actually take this on and work at it.
Okay. I'd say two positive things, or okay, what's going on now? Whoa, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Okay, okay, there we are. Two positive that I say that usually when they promote free trade
Okay.
is the is the free movement of capital as well as the free movement of goods, and then the reduced tariffs or no tariffs at all on goods, and yeah, across across the area. That's those are, I'd say, are the two things that are usually touted as being positives. So the free movement of capital, goods and capital, as well as the free movement of people. I think we're actually already seeing that in East Africa, right, with countries like I think Kenya and maybe Uganda, and I'm not sure about Rwanda, but they have introduced this passport for the nations in East Africa, whereby people have got that East African passport going on. We've also seen it right with the EU, whereby if you're in one EU country and you're an EU citizen,
Yeah.
you can easily move to another EU
Yeah.
country with
Okay.
with an EU visa and EU passport, and it's hassle free. So I guess that's the benefit. So the free movement of capital and the
Okay.
free movement of people,
People. Okay.
just to inspire ourselves. Yeah, just to inspire ourselves.
Okay. Thank you very much, Melali.
Thank you so much, Grace, and thank you so much to James for having me. And yeah, and Tamizan, I see you there, Lisa Grootboom. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for watching. Yeah, but it's definitely, this is definitely something that I think that we all should pay closer attention to and just educate ourselves on it, and yeah, do so objectively so. But I think I tried my best to actually elaborate more on it, even though you know my stance on it, that I'm not, I don't support free trade. Okay, let me correct myself. Let me correct myself and say that I don't support free trade 100% all of it. I believe that
Okay. To
the way in
understand.
which,
Okay.
yeah, so I believe that we if you can implement free trade with protectionist policies. So if Africa is really determined to go this way, and we really are, by the looks of things, we really are going forward with it at full blown speed or steam. But let's have some bite. Let's be globally competitive. Let's have some bite against, because ultimately we need to compete outside the four walls of Africa. We need to, outside the four borders of Africa, we need to have some bite. And these
Yeah.
countries that are already established, they do practice free trade, but they implement or they mix it up with protectionist policies. So in areas that they are strong in and they want to remain strong in terms of trade, that's where they slap on protectionist policies to protect the local economy, local jobs. Because even if you are to go the isolationist route, which is protectionism on its own is also a bad idea. Just going full steam protectionism is also a bad idea. Going full steam free trade is a
Okay.
bad idea. You need to find a balance,
o-
basically.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That is great. That is great. Okay. Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you to you guys as well. It's a pity we started late, but at least, yeah, we were able to discuss this through.
Okay. So this
Thank
is
you so
here
much
we
for having
wrap
me.
up. Thank you to all our
Mhm.
viewers. We'll call it a night. Bye.
Cheers.